On Father's Day in the quiet Ohio town of Brooksville, retired mechanic John Miller never expected the celebration in his modest kitchen to turn into a moment that would change his life and his family forever. His daughter, Melissa Whitman, breezed in with her usual energy, dropping a crumpled to dollars Powerball ticket onto the table with a smirk. "If you win, Dad, half is mine," she joked, her words sharp enough to draw uneasy glances from the rest of the family sitting beside her. Melissa's wealthy father-in-law, Charles Whitman, waited patiently for his turn. When it came, Melissa pulled out an elegant gift box and revealed a $13,000 luxury cruise to the Mediterranean paid for with money from John's own bank account. "Charles deserves the best," she said, praising him for all he's done for their family. The air in the room grew heavy. John's calloused hands, the same ones that had worked 60-hour weeks to put Melissa through college, clutched the lottery ticket, a so-called gift purchased with stolen funds. No one spoke. Even Henry Whitman, Charles's father and a respected local businessman, shifted uncomfortably. In that moment, John didn't yet know the scrap of paper would be worth $120 million, or that it would ignite a battle for loyalty, truth, and dignity. What he did know was that something in his relationship with Melissa had shifted, something he might never get back. The day after that awkward Father's Day dinner, John sat at his worn oak kitchen table, the morning sun cutting across a stack of bills and his open checkbook. It was a ritual he'd followed for decades, first as a young father counting every dime to keep food on the table, now as a retiree making sure his savings stretched far enough. He sipped his coffee, scanning down the neat rows of transactions, until one line stopped him cold. Premier Travel Services, $13,472. 16. At first, he thought it must be a mistake. He hadn't been anywhere near a travel agency in years. But as he cross-checked the date, his gut sank. It was 3 days before Father's Day, the day Melissa had surprised Charles with that extravagant cruise. His hands trembled as he picked up the phone and dialed her number. She answered on the third ring, her tone carrying that faint edge of impatience he'd come to recognize. "Melissa, I'm looking at my bank statement," he said, forcing his voice to stay calm. "There's a charge for over $13,000 for a cruise." A pause, then a light laugh. "Oh, that? Yeah, I booked that for Charles. He's done so much for us. He deserved something nice for once." John blinked. You took over $13,000 from my account without asking." "Dad, it's family money. And honestly, you wouldn't have spent it anyway. It was just sitting there. Charles helped us buy our house, paid for Jake's private school, even covered our country club membership. This was just returning the favor." Her voice was casual, almost condescending, as if she were explaining something simple to a child. John's chest tightened. "Melissa, that's theft. You stole from me." "It's not stealing when it's for family," she snapped. "And frankly, Charles has been more of a real father figure in the last few years than." She stopped, but the damage was done. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. John remembered every double shift at the garage, every oil-stained late night he'd worked to put her through college. He remembered standing in the cold at her high school graduation, pride swelling in his chest. Now she was telling him that his years of sacrifice amounted to nothing compared to a man who'd bought her comfort in recent years. He didn't argue further. Instead, he hung up, walked to the small desk in the corner of his living room, and pulled out his bank folder. Within an hour, he was speaking to a representative at First National Bank, his voice steady this time. "I need to revoke all authorized access to my accounts." Effective immediately. When the call ended, John sat back in his chair. The house felt quiet, almost too quiet, but for the first time in a long while, he felt solid, protected. That feeling didn't last long. By evening, his phone buzzed with messages from neighbors and old friends. Melissa had taken to Facebook, posting a carefully worded tale about her greedy father cutting her off from shared family funds after she'd given a generous gift to her father-in-law. Comments rolled in, some sympathetic, others downright hostile. People he'd known for decades were suddenly questioning his character. The following morning at the corner diner, conversations hushed when he walked in. He noticed glances over coffee mugs, Quick whispers exchanged in booths. For the first time in his life, in a town where he'd fixed half the neighborhood's cars, John Miller felt like an outsider. Back at home, the so-called gift sat where it had since Sunday night. The $2 Powerball ticket Melissa had tossed on the table. He had no idea it would soon pull him into the middle of a storm far bigger than any family argument. For now, all he knew was that his daughter had crossed a line he couldn't ignore, and the crack in their relationship wasn't going to heal with a simple apology. Something fundamental had shifted, and deep down, John feared there was no way back. That night, John barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Melissa's smirk across the dinner table, her voice dismissing the theft like it was nothing. By dawn, he had made up his mind whatever came next, he would not let her have access to his finances again. After a quiet breakfast of toast and black coffee, he dialed First National Bank once more. This time, the call wasn't about asking, it was about acting. "This is John Miller," he told the representative. "I want to put additional security measures on my accounts, new PINs, new passwords. No outside access from anyone but me." The young man on the other end was polite, professional, and efficient. 15 minutes later, Melissa's name was gone from every record. For the first time in years, John felt he had locked his own front door, metaphorically speaking. But by mid-afternoon, the blowback started. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister, Margaret. "John, what's going on? Melissa posted something on Facebook about you cutting her off. People are talking." John's stomach tightened. Against his better judgment, he logged into his account and saw the post. There it was, a smiling picture of Melissa and Charles on their patio, captioned with a carefully crafted narrative. "It breaks my heart to say this, but my father has decided to cut me off from what's always been shared family money. After all I've done for him, helping with Mom's passing, managing his affairs when he needed me, he's suddenly decided I'm not worthy of his trust. All because I wanted to thank Charles, who has done so much for our family. I never thought my own father could be so cruel." Underneath were dozens of comments. "That's awful. Melissa, your dad should be grateful to have a daughter like you. Family money is for family. Period. Charles is a wonderful man. He deserved that cruise." John scrolled in disbelief, each remark like another small stone thrown at his reputation. Some of these people had eaten at his table, shaken his hand at church, asked him for help with their cars. The next day at the grocery store, he noticed two women in the produce aisle whispering as he walked past. In line at the post office, a man he'd known for 20 years barely met his eye. Even his young paperboy, usually cheerful, looked away when handing him the morning edition. Melissa wasn't just telling her version, she was winning the PR battle. And John knew why. She'd mastered the art of framing herself as the victim, something she'd been doing since her teenage years whenever she wanted something badly enough. That evening, Margaret called again. "John, is any of this true? People are saying you locked her out of money she needed for her family." He kept his voice calm. "Margaret, she took $13,000 from my account without asking. She used it to buy Charles a cruise. Then she gave me a $2 lottery ticket and said if I won, she'd take half. Does that sound like someone in need, or someone taking advantage?" There was a long pause on the other end. "I had no idea. She made it sound like you'd gone cold-hearted. That's the story she wants out there," John said quietly, "and it's working." After hanging up, he sat in his recliner, staring at the muted television. He'd spent his life building a name in this town, a name for hard work, honesty, and keeping his word. Now, with a few keystrokes and a well-placed smile, his own daughter was chipping away at that legacy. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about respect and the painful realization that Melissa no longer gave him any. What John didn't know yet was that the scrap of paper lying on his kitchen counter, the one he'd considered a joke, was about to turn that entire conversation on its head. 3 nights later, John was in his recliner, flipping through television channels more out of habit than interest. The muted light from the screen washed over the living room, landing on the corner of his kitchen counter where the $2 lottery ticket still sat, creased, unimpressive, and completely forgotten. He paused on the local station just as the bright red Powerball logo flashed across the screen. The announcer's cheerful voice rang out, "Good evening, Ohio." Here are tonight's winning numbers, one by one. The numbers rolled out: 7, 14, 23, 35, 40 to Powerball 18. John froze. Something about those numbers tugged at the back of his mind. He reached for a pen and scrawled them down on the back of an envelope. Then he turned toward the counter, eyeing the ticket Melissa had tossed at him with that smirk on Father's Day. He picked it up, smoothing the creases with the same care he used on a fragile piece of engine wiring. The numbers lined up perfectly, every single one. His pulse kicked into overdrive. Could this really be happening? He read them again slowly, this time his lips moving with each digit. It wasn't a dream. This $2 joke was worth $120 million. For a long moment, he just sat there, staring at it. The irony was so sharp it almost made him laugh. Melissa had bought the ticket with money she'd stolen from him, tossed it at him like a scrap, and joked about taking half if he won. Now here it was, worth more than he could have ever imagined. He grabbed the phone and dialed the lottery hotline. The automated voice confirmed it. The numbers were correct. The jackpot was $120 million, and the winning ticket had been sold at the gas station 2 blocks from his house. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. He placed the ticket inside a plastic sleeve and tucked it into his desk drawer like a sacred relic. Sleep was impossible. His mind kept racing between disbelief, joy, and the looming certainty that Melissa would soon find out. The next morning, the sun streamed through the kitchen window, lighting up the neat stacks of papers on his table. He took a deep breath, picked up the phone, and called the Ohio Lottery Commission to begin the claims process. 2 days later, John drove to the state office in Columbus, the ticket sealed in an envelope and tucked inside his jacket pocket. The building was sleek and modern, a stark contrast to his old pickup parked out front. Inside, a friendly official named Jana Chen took the ticket, examined it under a scanner, and smiled. "Mr. Miller," she said, "congratulations. This is indeed the winning ticket. We'll need 48 hours to complete the verification and prepare your payout options." John nodded, still feeling as if he were floating somewhere outside his own body. Taxes, lump sum versus annuity, public ceremony, all of it washed over him like distant waves. What mattered was that the ticket was real, and the money was his. He drove home in silence, the road unfolding ahead like a path into a completely different life. But as he turned into his driveway, he spotted Melissa's car parked there. She was waiting on his porch, her smile wide, her eyes alight with a hunger he recognized all too well. "Dad," she said before he could speak, "I heard about the lottery. Do you realize what this means? We're millionaires. Remember, half is mine." Her words landed like a stone in his chest. This wasn't going to be a celebration. It was going to be a battle. John stood on his porch, the key still in his hand, while Melissa practically bounced with excitement. Her voice was bright but edged with a kind of urgency he recognized from years past, those moments when she'd set her mind on something and wasn't going to let go. "Half is mine, Dad," she said again, as though repetition could make it true. "Everyone heard me say it at dinner. We had an agreement." He stepped inside, holding the door open just enough for her to follow. "Melissa," he began, his voice measured, "you handed me that ticket as a gift. That's what you called it. There was no agreement, no contract, no nothing. And you bought it with money you took from my account without permission." Her smile flickered, just for a second, before hardening into something else. "It was family money, and I used it for a family purpose. You're twisting this. You're trying to cheat me out of what's mine." John looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, he didn't see his daughter. He saw a stranger with his daughter's face. "The ticket became mine the moment you gave it to me. That's the law, Melissa. Whatever your intentions, you don't get to change the rules after the fact." She slammed her hand down on his kitchen table, the sound echoing in the quiet house. "I'll sue you. I'll prove that ticket belongs to me. And when I win, everyone will know what kind of man you really are." "What kind of man is that?" John asked quietly. Her jaw tightened. "The kind who would steal from his own child." John didn't flinch. He'd weathered tougher accusations in his life, but this one coming from her cut deep. She turned on her heel and stormed out, her heels clicking against the hardwood like a gavel declaring the end of their conversation. Moments later, he heard her car roar to life and peeled down the street. He sat there for a long time, staring at the paperwork from the lottery commission still spread across his table. The irony was thick. He was now worth $120 million, and all he felt was tired. The next morning, his phone lit up with notifications. Melissa had gone public again, this time in full attack mode. On Facebook, she'd posted, "Urgent, my father has stolen my lottery ticket and is claiming the entire jackpot for himself. This is the same man who cut off my access to family money and humiliated me. The ticket was my gift to him with the clear understanding we'd share the winnings. This is elder abuse in reverse. Please share so people know the truth." Her words spread quickly. Comments poured in, some from strangers, some from neighbors John had known for decades. "This is disgusting. How could a father do this? Call a lawyer." She wasn't finished. On Instagram, Melissa appeared in a tearful video from her car, mascara streaking her cheeks as she told her followers how her greedy father had betrayed her. Charles joined in too, posting on LinkedIn about reverse elder abuse and how John's actions were destroying the fabric of their family. By noon, John couldn't step outside without noticing the shift. A pair of neighbors stood by his mailbox, talking in low voices until they spotted him at the window. Then they quickly walked away. The grocery store cashier barely made eye contact. Inside his home, the walls felt closer somehow. The air felt heavier. His reputation built over a lifetime of honest work was crumbling in a matter of days. Still, even with the sting of betrayal and the weight of public judgment pressing on him, John knew one thing with absolute certainty. He hadn't stolen that ticket. He'd been given it. And no amount of shouting, posting, or public shaming was going to change that fact. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. By the third day of the online smear campaign, John was starting to feel like a ghost in his own town. He couldn't run a simple errand without catching fragments of whispers, "That's him," or "the lottery guy," as he passed. That morning, his landline rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but the area code was local. He hesitated, then picked it up. "Mr. Miller? This is Henry Whitman, Charles's father." John's grip on the phone tightened. "I'm not sure what there is to discuss, Mr. Whitman. There's quite a lot," Henry said evenly, "including what I witnessed on Father's Day. Can you meet me at the Lincoln Diner in an hour?" The Lincoln Diner was an old-fashioned place on the edge of town, the kind with red vinyl booths and a waitress who'd been pouring coffee since the Reagan years. It was the last place John expected to meet a member of the Whitman family, but curiosity and a faint sense of hope got the better of him when he arrived. Henry was already seated in a corner booth, a pressed navy blazer over a white shirt, looking like he'd stepped out of a Chamber of Commerce meeting. He stood to shake John's hand. "Mr. Miller, I'll get straight to it," Henry began once they were seated. "I saw everything at that dinner. I saw Melissa toss you that lottery ticket and call it your Father's Day gift. I heard her make that joke about splitting winnings. There was no negotiation, no agreement, nothing binding. It was a gift, pure and simple." John studied the older man's face. Henry's expression was calm, but his eyes carried a weight of father's disappointment. "My son and daughter-in-law," Henry continued, "are telling a very different story online. They're damaging your name. Frankly, they're damaging mine, too." "Why help me?" John asked cautiously. "They're your family. Because I raised my son to value integrity above all else. And watching him behave like this, it's shameful. I won't stand by while lies destroy a man's reputation, especially when I can put the truth on record." Henry pulled out his phone and turned the screen toward John. On it was a drafted Facebook post, as a witness to the Father's Day gathering at John Miller's home. "I can confirm the lottery ticket in question was given as a gift, unconditionally. There was no agreement about sharing winnings. Any claims to the contrary are false. Mr. Miller is the rightful owner of that ticket." John read it twice. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Yes, I do," Henry replied, his thumb hovering over the post button. "My word still means something in this town. If it costs me some family dinners, so be it." He pressed post. Within minutes, The ripple effect began. Notifications popped up on Henry's phone, comments from longtime business associates, neighbors, and church members. If Henry says it, I believe it. This changes everything. For the first time in weeks, John felt the knot in his chest loosen. The tide wasn't turning completely, not yet, but someone respected was finally speaking up for him. As they walked out of the diner, Henry extended his hand again. Mr. Miller, the truth has a way of finding daylight. Sometimes, it just needs a little help. John drove home in silence, watching the late morning sun cut across the fields. For the first time since Melissa's betrayal, he felt something other than exhaustion. He felt hope. 2 weeks after his meeting with Henry Whitman, John's phone rang while he was making his morning coffee. This is Jean Etienne from the Ohio Lottery Commission. The voice said, Mr. Miller, your verification process is complete. We'd like to invite you to our formal check presentation ceremony tomorrow morning. John hesitated. He could almost hear Melissa's voice in his head. See her posts still floating around social media. A public ceremony? He asked. Yes. Winners can choose private or public. But given recent interest in your case, we thought you might prefer the transparency of a public event. He looked out the kitchen window toward his quiet street. For weeks, whispers had followed him everywhere. If this ceremony was public, the truth could stand in the open for everyone to see. I'll do it, he said finally. The next morning, John pulled his best navy suit from the back of the closet, the same one he'd worn to his wife's funeral. He paired it with a crisp white shirt and a burgundy tie Melissa had given him for Christmas years ago, back when their relationship had been warm and uncomplicated. When he arrived at the Columbus headquarters, the place buzzed with energy. Television crews set up cameras, reporters jotted notes, and lottery staff carried oversized checks like props in a play. Jana greeted him warmly, ready to become Ohio's newest millionaire. The ceremony began with polite applause as Jana introduced him. John stepped to the podium, the $120 million check behind him, cameras clicking like a chorus of cicadas. This is unexpected, he began, his voice carrying better than he expected. And I see it as a blessing, one I intend to use responsibly, to help others, and to live with dignity. Questions flew from the reporters. What would he buy first? Would he keep living in the same house? Did he plan to work again? John answered, with honesty and restraint, keeping the focus on gratitude rather than greed. Then, from the back of the crowd, a voice rang out, that's my ticket. We had an agreement. Heads turned. There was Melissa, dressed in a sharp navy dress, her face flushed with determination. Charles was right behind her, his jaw set. Security moved in, but Melissa's voice cut through the noise. Everyone here should know he's stealing from his own daughter. A reporter spun toward John. Mr. Miller, can you comment on this family dispute? John stayed calm. The ticket was a Father's Day gift from my daughter. Henry Whitman, who was present, has already confirmed the circumstances. That's all there is to it. Melissa's protests grew louder, her hands gesturing wildly, but the guards gently steered her toward the exit. Charles followed, his expression tight with frustration. John faced the crowd again. I plan to use this money to start a business I've dreamed about for years, to help those who deserve a second chance, and to live with the kind of integrity that makes a man worthy of good fortune. When the ceremony ended, John stepped outside into the brisk air, the giant check tucked under his arm, across the parking lot. He could see Melissa and Charles by their BMW arguing heatedly. Their voices rose, their hands slicing the air in angry gestures. As John climbed into his old pickup, he caught one last glimpse of them in the rearview mirror, still fighting, still tangled in the greed that had brought them here. For the first time in months, a small smile crept across his face. This time, it wasn't about winning the lottery. It was about winning himself back. The morning after the ceremony, John was at his kitchen table, sipping coffee and leafing through the local paper. There, in bold print, was his name next to the headline, Brooksville Man Claims $120 million. Powerball Prize. He was halfway through the article when he heard the crunch of tires on his driveway. Peering out the window, he saw Melissa's silver SUV. This time, she didn't burst through the door. She walked slowly up the path, her posture slouched, her steps tentative. When he opened the door, she offered a faint smile, her eyes rimmed red as if she'd been crying. "Dad, could we talk?" John hesitated, then stepped aside. She perched on the edge of the couch, clutching a tissue. "I'm sorry about yesterday," she began, her voice low and unsteady. "I was just overwhelmed. I didn't think clearly." He didn't say anything, letting her fill the silence. "Things are worse than I told you," she continued. "We're behind on the mortgage, the bank starting foreclosure, between the credit cards, the country club dues, Jake's private school, and Eric's business tanking. We're almost $400, zero in debt. I didn't know who else to turn to." Her words came in waves, painting a picture of late-night panic, sleepless worry, and a crumbling lifestyle. She reached for his hand. "You've always been there for me before. I just need help one more time, enough to save our house and get us back on our feet." "How much?" John asked. "2 million," she said quickly, as if rehearsed. "That's nothing compared to what you have left. You'd still have over 100 million. Dad, this would change everything for us." John's chest tightened, not from the number but from the familiarity of the script. He'd heard versions of this plea before, when she'd needed a new car after college, when she'd wanted help with the down payment on her current home, and each time, he'd caved. "Melissa," he said gently, "you stole $13,000 from me without asking. You humiliated me in public. You tried to take my lottery ticket by force. Now you're asking me to reward that behavior with $2 million. Her eyes filled again, but this time the tears seemed sharper, angrier. "This is different. I admit I was wrong before. But if we lose the house, our life is over. Jake's education, everything will be gone. You need to solve your own problems," John said evenly. The softness in her face vanished. Her voice hardened. "So you're really going to sit on all that money while your daughter and grandson lose their home? I love you," he replied quietly, "but I won't enable your choices anymore." Melissa stood abruptly, pacing toward the window and back. "Fine, but don't expect to be part of Jake's life going forward. No holidays, no birthdays, no phone calls. You'll die alone, Dad, because you were too selfish to help your own family. If that's your choice," John said, "I'll have to accept it." For a moment, she stared at him, perhaps realizing that her old tactic steers. Guilt, threats no longer worked. Her final words were cold. "Money's changed you." "No," John said. "Money's made me free." She left without another word, her SUV's tires squealing as she backed out. John watched from the window until she was gone, then turned away, the house settling into its familiar silence. It was a silence he'd once feared, but now it felt peaceful. The little girl who used to fall asleep in his lap during story time was gone. The woman who remained was someone he couldn't save. He poured himself a fresh cup of coffee, knowing that, for the first time in years, he was finally drawing the line. 3 months later, John stood in the middle of his empty living room, the last of the moving boxes stacked neatly by the door. The sunlight streamed through bare windows, casting long rectangles on the hardwood floor. He pulled his phone from his pocket, scrolled to Melissa's contact, and hesitated only for a moment before tapping block. This number. Some bridges, he realized, weren't meant to be rebuilt. The drive to Dayton took a little over 2 hours, winding through rolling farmland and small towns with faded brick storefronts. It was far enough from Brooksville that unannounced visits from Melissa would require real effort, and John knew she wouldn't bother unless there was money in it. For her, his new house sat on a quiet, tree-lined street where neighbors waved from their porches and kids rode bikes until dusk. It wasn't flashy, but it was a fresh start in a place where no one cared about the lottery drama. Just a few miles away stood a dusty old sign, "Henderson's Classic Auto Restoration, for sale." John had driven past it on his first day, scouting the area, and felt a pull in his gut. Inside, the air was rich with the scent of motor oil and worn leather. Rows of half-finished classic cars lined the bays: Fords, Chevys, a battered '67 Mustang that reminded him of the first car he'd ever rebuilt. "You sure you want this much work?" asked Tom Henderson, the grizzled owner ready for retirement. "Most folks your age are thinking about slowing down. John ran his hand along the Mustang's fender. "I'm not most folks. I'm just getting started. Asterisk." Within a week, the deed was signed. The shop became Miller's Classic Auto Restoration, and John hired 3 local mechanics, young guys hungry to learn the old-school way of doing things. The sound of tools clanking, engines rumbling, and rock music drifting from a dusty radio filled the air each day. For the first time in years, John felt like he belonged somewhere again. But he didn't stop there. With part of his winnings, he launched the Single Fathers Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to helping dads raising kids on their own. It was his way of honoring the years after his wife passed, when he juggled 2 jobs, household chores, and bedtime stories without anyone to lean on. Life in Dayton had a rhythm he hadn't realized he missed. On Thursdays, he'd grab coffee at the local diner where the waitress knew his order. Without asking, weekends were for turning wrenches in the shop or taking long walks through the quiet streets. He could stand in the grocery store checkout line without overhearing his name whispered behind him. Sometimes when the shop was quiet, his thoughts drifted to Melissa. There was no bitterness now, just a dull ache, like an old scar. He hoped she'd eventually face the consequences of her choices and find her way back to a better version of herself. But he no longer felt responsible for getting her there. On a clear autumn evening, John locked up after finishing a meticulous restoration on a cherry red 1969 Camaro. Driving home, he passed the community center where the foundation's plaque hung, supporting strong families through tough times. He pulled into his driveway and looked up at the first stars of the night. Somewhere out there, Melissa was living with the path she'd chosen. Here in Dayton, John was building something lasting, one rebuilt engine, one helping hand, one honest day's work at a time. Above his office desk, in a simple black frame, hung the $2 lottery ticket, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Sometimes, the most valuable gifts come disguised as garbage, and the hardest lessons come wrapped in pain. And as he turned off the shop lights that night, John knew one thing for certain: he hadn't just won the lottery. He'd won his freedom. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when John found himself sitting in the small sunroom of his new home, a cup of coffee steaming gently in his hands. Outside, golden leaves drifted lazily from the maple trees that lined his yard. The shop was closed, the phones were silent, and for once, he had nothing demanding his attention. He leaned back in the wicker chair and let his eyes wander to the framed $2 Powerball ticket. On the wall, visitors often assumed it was a symbol of luck. To John, it was a symbol of something far more important: survival. Not survival in the physical sense, but survival of self-respect, boundaries, and the quiet courage to stand firm when the world, even family, tried to shake them. He thought about the road that had led here, the betrayal at his own kitchen table, the public humiliation, the threats, the desperate plea for money. Each chapter had tested him in ways he'd never expected at his age. Yet each test had stripped away something false, leaving him with something real: freedom, purpose, and peace. John had learned that wealth doesn't change who you are. It reveals who you've always been. For Melissa, it exposed greed. For him, it unearthed resilience. And maybe that was the true jackpot: discovering that his worth had nothing to do with a bank account, and everything to do with the man staring back at him in the mirror. As the last of the autumn sunlight warmed the room, John smiled, not the forced smile of someone pretending to be fine, but the steady, content smile of a man who had fought for his life in ways that had nothing to do with money. And sometimes the hardest thing you'll ever do is set a boundary with the people you love. But real love doesn't demand you lose yourself. Stand firm, protect your peace, because in the end, the richest life you can live is one built on respect for yourself and from others. Now it's your turn. What would you have done if you were in John's shoes? Would you have given Melissa the $2 million or stood your ground? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. If this story moved you, tap the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next powerful life lesson. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we tell the truth about life.